We will speak a little bit about safeguarding our collective mental health. To safeguard our collective health and survival far before they become imperiled, we need to get to a level of heightened emotional health or a state of health that is higher than the mere absence of disease, as the World Health Organization once described. So that a mental health matter underlay Trump contagion, the shared psychotic behavior of a nation, and our collective suicidality, that is our death spiral, as I sometimes call it, resulting in vast pandemic deaths, escalation of political terrorism, geopolitical destabilization, and a race toward nuclear war, as well as domestic and international opportunism through another Trump presidency, can all be traced back to our collective mental health. We've come to a point where we cannot continue placing Band-Aids on a hemorrhage. In fact, we're in a critical state right now. The point I have always tried to advance is that the deeper the understanding we have, the more feasible the solutions and unleashing of power of truth. This is as true of matters relating to Donald Trump's mental pathology as it is of the global encroachment of war. What we're contending with is, according to Carl Jung, not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself, who is man's greatest danger to man. In other words, the problem is our own mind, which we can choose to change in a split second. It's the hardest thing to do, as well as the easiest thing to do. So we will find that we are in a paradoxical situation where the more urgent and the more dire the circumstances, the more necessary it is to pause, to understand deeply and correctly, not just to know and to take correct action, but to access a space in our psyches that brings out our ultimate strength. So the solution is not predicated on methods alone, but on the foundation from which they will spring. This is what Mohandas Gandhi, leader of the Indian independence movement, called satyagraha, which is Sanskrit for holding firmly to truth. So the first theme I'd like to speak about is love. My psychiatrist mentor and colleague, Dr. James Gilligan, articulated that love is as essential to the soul as oxygen is to the body, noting how central love is to human life. German writer Max Müller expresses this succinctly. Eine Blume kann nicht blühen ohne Sonnenschein. Und ein Mensch kann nicht leben ohne Liebe, which means a flower cannot bloom without sunshine, and a human cannot live without love. Where love is lacking, violence dominates. Because love is so central to life and all that is good in the world, if one believes one cannot have love, then the next best thing is to gain dominance over the product of life and to kill it. This is the logic of violence, which leads to fantasies of absolute power, of demonstrations of omnipotence through infinite destruction. However, while death can be dramatic, it cannot do what love can, that is, bring about life and the vibrancy and animation that come from the spiritual yearning for a larger life, to want to care for more than just oneself and to belong to something greater. It fills a void and nurtures growth in ways that violence never can. In fact, violence is insatiable. Love comes from the Old English word lufu, which means affection as well as friendliness, from the Proto-Germanic lubo, which is related to joy and praise. When love is absent at the societal, communal, familial, or personal level, or in any combination thereof, this aspect of humanity may not have a chance to grow. The psyche is at risk of dying, or may revolt violently against this quote unquote death in ways that can cause literal death. Sigmund Freud conceived a death drive as innate as the drive for life. But examining more closely, the death drive appears more as a life impulse gone awry. In other words, violence, no matter how self-defeating, will have come from some kind of longing for life. When one is deprived of love, one does not remain neutral to it. One develops a psychological defense system in order to make the catastrophic death endurable. But then the psychology rejects love even when it becomes available. That is the paradox of it. Quote unquote, tough men, for example, may consider care and affection to be for sissies and wusses, weaklings with whom one is too strong to share rank. The willingness to destroy oneself as well as many other people as possible, rather than to admit these basic needs, reveals the very urgency of those needs. Individuals or groups engaging in violent behavior may not always be aware of or be able to articulate these reasons. Actions, however, speak louder than words. In this manner, we all experience how so in this manner, we all have desires and need love, but become perpetually wanting animals, to use Abraham Maslow's words, by thwarting actual or imminent basic needs, which leads to psychopathy. Psychopathy, by definition, is to be outside of human love. Violent individuals are also generally lacking in activity and energy compared to those in a state of health, who feel spirited, sacred, creative, and whole. The energy we see in violence comes from agitation and anger, a desire for retaliation, and a mimicry of generativity, or the exertion of exaggerated energy where genuine life force is lacking. So true strength does not require extravagant displays like this. It manifests quietly in actual works of creativity, productivity, and other qualities that inspire genuine respect. In other words, one does not have legitimate and socially acceptable means of achieving self-worth, or if one does not have those things, then one resorts to illegitimate means such as violence. Through displays of force, one can at least inspire fear, if not respect, to fend off the feeling of inadequacy, even if just temporarily. But, of course, it comes with later peril. Retribution occurs when violent individuals target signs of life, sometimes in an attempt to wipe out reminders of their lack. This is sometimes interpreted as a wish to destroy goodness out of an overwhelming envy of those who live in love and are full of life. To overcome this self-destructive tendency, like peace, one must abandon these lonely, senseless wanderings in futility to regain one's center. So this spiritual center that is generous, abundant, and creative and generative does not require a grand possession or quote unquote power. I experienced it in the villages of Tanzania where I lived with the locals. I did ethnographic work there in my training in social psychiatry in the years following my psychiatry training. At the time, the nation had the lowest gross national product, or GDP, in the world, and no one had electricity or running water. in the villages, but from children to adults of every religion and every national or tribal custom, they felt such love and connection with heaven and earth and with one another. They needed little else. No one starved until everyone starved. So great a treasure is valueless by the world's measure, and more so as these stable regions disappear. And yet it is something more valuable than what any amount of money or power can buy. To feel, quote unquote, the love of God seemed to be to see the world in a whole new way, shining in innocence, alive with hope, and overflowing with blessings. There was nothing to fear in such a world as it took an animated form. In Swahili, the language they spoke, all things are alive. They welcomed you, rejoiced in you, and kept you safe from all danger and pain. This was the world they experienced and what they decided to create in their villages in lieu of what the rest of the world embraced: hatred, attack, revenge, and death. Of course, since I spent much time there, which was immediately after the death of their enlightened educator leader, Julius Nyerere, which made the region so exceptional. It has become more like the rest of Africa, influenced by capitalism and wrought with corruption. So it's no longer that peaceful haven that I got to see. But still, never had I imagined a society where personality disorders did not exist. And yet there it was. This is because of what Ralph Waldo Emerson said what he meant when he said, "We are rich only through what we give and poor only through what we refuse." So in this emotional, psychological, and spiritual state, we could also create unity. Fragmentation decreases. What we often do not recognize is that when pathology is on the rise, there's increasing fragmentation. And it's much like the fragmentation that happens in an individual or in a nation state, in a state of internal division, polarization, conflict, and strife. Very much like a nation in such a state, an individual falling into pathology experiences internal conflicts, fragmentation, destabilization, and fear. Indeed, the old English word for health, health, I think that's how you pronounce it, means wholeness or being whole. Fragmentation, by definition, is disease. So while schism and loss of unity are most pronounced in serious mental illness, such as in schizophrenia, where there's a split between reason and emotion, that's where the word comes from. Health is also about resolving various levels of fragmentation and resulting in unity, such as in our national motto, E pluribus unum. For healthier individuals or societies, conflict may arise as a natural result of diversity and differences of opinion, but it is dealt with as an opportunity for mutual learning and reconciliation and eventual unity. That's how the motto E pluribus unum was even conceived in the first place. We may have been far from the reality of it, but our democracy and aspirations for democracy had created a state of wholeness enough for it to be imaginable. Less healthy individuals or societies cannot do this, perceiving differences as a threat and a need for retreat into homogeneous conformity or violence against the other. And perhaps we're experiencing that as well as our national identity becomes diminishes to certain tribes, certain groups, or certain skin colors, that we are no longer able to conceive of that unity. The Old English for wholeness or health is similarly related to Gaelic, which means holy. There's immense power that arises when we go from fragmentation to unity. British educator Keith Boulding described 3 faces of power: threat, exchange, and integrative power. Those who subscribe to a paradigm of the world as threatening and fragmented will perceive each party as either right or wrong, so that if they can prove the other wrong, they will be right and win, while the other loses. From this view, those who oppress others also oppress themselves, as they lose access to the greatest power. Those who abide by a paradigm of the world running by exchange, on the other hand, then have a worldview where trade will occur as a form of tit-for-tat negotiations. So it's a step above winning or losing, but it's still transactional. When I was teaching at Yale College, I began my course with the phrase, "We live in a violent world of our own making." I said so not to be morose, but for the students to recognize that the current state of the world is not natural and not necessary, if not insane, and that we must envision a different way. Reconciliation and unity can thus occur from the bottom up when they do. Evolved perceptions unleash a capacity that we do not yet fully comprehend. Human history has only seen glimpses of an immensely generative force that is the very fuel of life-affirming change. There's truth in the motto that has been used since pre-revolutionary times: united we stand, divided we fall.